So Singleplayer Starfighter Assault has finally been added to Battlefront 2, and it's made a lot of players, myself included, very, very happy. This is a feature that we've been asking for since the game released, and to be able to play some form of vehicles offline without having to join lobbies or deal with matchmaking is definitely a big improvement for Battlefront 2. So before we move forwards today and take a closer look at the mode, I want to give a big thank you to the developers for adding this functionality. You guys didn't really have to do this, you could have very easily just focused on multiplayer content or bug fixes, because the single player side of Battlefront 2 will always be smaller and admittedly less of a priority. But the fact that you went and did this anyway means a great deal to people that have been asking for Starfighter Assault in arcade since the game released. So a big thank you to any and all developers who worked on this and helped make it a reality. Now moving on, I've been playtesting the offline content for Starfighter Assault since it released, just getting used to it, pushing it to its limits, and seeing what effect the settings have on core gameplay. Essentially, it's the same as the arcade ground content in that you can play a variety of battles across the different maps, a couple of modes. Onslaught has been ported to space battles as well, so it's kind of just the same. Now as for whether it's good or bad, that's a more complicated question. The gameplay is fun, there's no doubt about that. Being able to just jump in and fly around as any of the starfighters in all of the eras, and across all of the Starfighter Assault maps, is definitely a good feature to add. And it's helpful to have an offline mode for when you just don't feel like playing against other players. So overall, this new mode was a good addition to Battlefront 2, and I have to admit it's really fun to play. But where it begins to show some cracks is in the variety and depth of the gameplay. The problem with arcade is that it has always lacked any form of objective-based gameplay, which means that the only real objective or way to win is to kill enemies. Now for ground combat, where you're just running around as a super battle droid or Darth Maul, that's perfectly fine. But for Starfighter Assault, this is kind of a problem. What makes Starfighter Assault fun and engaging is being able to see the AI attacking objectives like Venator Star Destroyers. This creates atmosphere that helps frame the battle and give the player much more variety and content in regards to how they approach the objective and how they fight against their enemies. For example, with real objectives similar to the multiplayer Starfighter Assault, you'd be able to choose bombers or interceptors based on what you need at the time, and really set up your own battles. In the arcade version of Starfighter Assault that was just released, things are much more simplistic. I'm afraid to admit that within about 20 minutes of playing Starfighter Assault in arcade, I was bored, which shouldn't really be possible. This is a big feature addition to Battlefront 2, and given the number of maps that have been enabled for Starfighter Assault, I should be able to get at least an hour of fresh gameplay out of this. But sadly, this is the key area where single-player content in Battlefront 2, excluding the campaign, has consistently fallen down. I think it might be a constraint on development resources. Obviously, assigning a load of developers onto single-player content isn't really the best idea, considering we need multiplayer content more than anything else right now. But regardless of the reasons, the reality is that this Starfighter Assault update feels empty. The gameplay isn't rewarding, and the lack of even basic objectives is a huge detriment to what would otherwise be a fantastic mode to play. You could very easily build layers around this mode with challenges for credits, timed challenges for skins, and a whole variety of other additions that could come alongside future seasons. Now, saying that the mode feels empty and that I was ultimately bored after 20 minutes might sound really negative. I want to clarify, I do enjoy playing Starfighter Assault in arcade, but I'm only saying this because I see a huge amount of potential here, not just for single-player Starfighter Assault to improve, but for Starfighter Assault in general to keep evolving and keep getting better. The Starfighter Assault game mode was absolutely brilliant at release, and was definitely a big improvement over Fighter Squadron from Battlefront 2015. But I've got to admit that it is starting to get a little bit stale, and just a few adjustments would significantly help to improve it. Which brings us to the second half of today's video, where I'm going to talk about how I personally would go about adding to and improving Starfighter Assault. Now, to be clear, I'm talking specifically about single player here, but remember, pretty much anything I say today can also be applied to multiplayer as well, so keep that in mind. So the first adjustment I would make, and what I think is probably the biggest change, would be to add real objectives to the single player maps. In multiplayer, each of the maps comes bundled with objectives, so on Camino you have to take down the Venator by disabling its systems, destroying its engines, and taking out its escorting cruisers. And of course on Ryloth you have to fly into the reactor to destroy the Lucrehulk. These are all brilliant objectives that should have been copied over into the single-player portion of Starfighter Assault. Now of course that's much more complex than what we got, and I'm guessing that they probably didn't have enough resources to pull something like that off. What I think they could have done, however, is just add more cruisers, more turrets, more of pretty much everything. Right now, Starfighter Assault, in single-player at least, feels very empty. Even on Onslaught turned to Extreme, it still feels empty. We need more action and more atmosphere, and having effectively an empty skybox doesn't really help with this at all. Just adding a couple of cruisers every couple of minutes that come in and get attacked by the AI starfighters would really help to keep the mode interesting. We already have some Venators on Camino that fly around and for the most part are mostly stationary, but they're not tied to the objective, and enemy starfighters aren't really actively going after them. So even though the potential is there to frame an epic battle, the AI unfortunately just aren't set up to do this. Another change I would make to Starfighter Assault would be to spawn the enemy fighters in as waves. Seeing reinforcements and whole squadrons on the horizon would be really cool, and it would add a level of realism to the battle that otherwise doesn't exist. Now to be clear, they already have almost a wave-style system. I've seen enemy squadrons respawn on the periphery, just at the edge of the map, like flying in, so there's definitely some form of wave system there, but it's not made aware to the player that a new reinforcement wave is coming. They're not tying it into the narrative of playing this mode, so it's kind of an afterthought more than anything else. Which is why I'd imagine that this is one of the easier changes to make. You could tie the reinforcement waves to a timer, or simply just have them respawn when the existing wave is nearly destroyed. All you'd have to do is make sure the player is aware of when they're respawning and where they're coming from, and it would help add a lot of atmosphere to a pretty empty game mode. Moving on, another feature I would add is limited time targets. This is something that was present in Battlefront 2015 in the original Fighter Squadron game mode. If you can't remember, Imperial shuttles and Rebel GR-75 transports would occasionally fly across the map, and destroying these would give your team a big boost in score. It's something that, ironically, I ranted about on more than one occasion. I remember being very loudly opposed to having anything similar to that in Starfighter Assault at the time, and I personally felt that it was a mistake to have a single transport, especially considering how easy it was just to line up behind them and take them down. Now, of course, in multiplayer back in 2015, this didn't really work very well because it was just the one transport, and it was almost always destroyed instantly. But in single player today, there is a big missed opportunity here where they could set up transports to act not only as atmosphere, but as a small component of a larger single-player Starfighter game mode. So for example, they could time the transports to fly in groups and have the AI cluster around them, essentially defending and attacking them based on their team. This is pure atmosphere, and it would really help if Starfighter Assault in Arcade had something similar to this. I've got no idea how difficult this would be to add, but regardless, if they ever get the chance, it's something that I'd like to see done in-game. And finally, the last change that I propose is something that was actually a feature in Battlefront 2 2005. You had the ability in previous Battlefront games to have Wingmen. This really only worked on the ground, but it was cool to be able to get kills as your character, increase your level, and by doing so get more people to follow you around the map. I think the maximum you could have was 4 people, if I remember correctly, and in the past it did look a little bit ridiculous, but it was still fun. Now for Battlefront 2 2017, this could be a really interesting feature to add. So for example, if I fly around as a starfighter and get maybe 10 kills in a row without dying, I should be prompted with a message asking if I'd like a wingman. They should then spawn in as either a fighter, interceptor, or bomber. It can be random or it can be a selection. Either way, it would be awesome to collect wingmen whilst you're playing and fly around in the map as a squad. By all means, let them be shot down. You can then have your own mini challenge of keeping your wingmen alive. But just being able to see them flying alongside you and attacking enemies with you would be really cool. This isn't really a change that I ever expect to be added in-game. It would probably be more hassle than it's worth, but I think it would be pretty cool and I'd love to see it someday. Anyway, that's it for this quick video today. I didn't really have much time for anything else, so I decided to focus on getting this out so you guys had something to watch today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If there's anything you want to see me cover, whether it be multiplayer mechanics, heroes versus villains balance, anything like that, then leave it down in the comments below, and I'll try my best to make a video on it. Even though the more informative and deep dive style videos don't really get many views, I do enjoy making them, and talking about Battlefront 2 in a more technical and critical sense in regards to feedback and making the game better is always fun, and it's something that I want to do a lot more. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you.